I have never seen a frame time graph that stuttery before, guys. And look, as I turn the camera, I hope this picks up in the YouTube video. I'm sure it will, because it's just so stuttery. It's like it's jumping from one place to the next. It's weird, guys. This is absolutely broken. And this is what happens when you try to enable ray tracing on an AMD GPU. It was not this stuttery without ray tracing on, which I can show you right now. And then I also have a weird kind of a fix. It's sort of a fix. We'll talk about it. So first of all, with ray tracing off, the frame time graph is still way more stuttery than I would like, but it's smooth enough and the frame time, overall is low enough that if I wasn't staring at that frame time graph, I would not perceive those little ups and downs. So in other words, if I'm just playing the game with, in general, things kind of maxed out, although keep in mind, I actually do have FSR on right now. Let's actually talk about the graphics settings. So we're currently at 4K, and we have the settings at, right now, ray tracing off. Now I'm using FSR2 right now, and currently we're at the performance mode, but let's back off all the way to the, you know what, let's just go to TAAU, and so this will be native 4K, and if you guys are like, native 4K, that's upscaling, only if you turn on the dynamic resolution scaling, guys. Like, look, I'll prove it to you. FXAA will all agree that is native 4K, just bad anti-aliasing. The bushes look really flickery right now. I don't know how much that comes across in the YouTube video. But we're at like 64 frames per second. If I go ahead and kick on TAAU with the dynamic res scaling turned off, just please notice that there's only a few frames per second difference there because TAA does take a little bit of overhead, but we would get a frame rate boost if it was actually upscaling, guys. So this is native 4K. Some people were questioning me in the comments section about that on my 4090 video, so I thought I'd talk about that. Anyway, the other settings here are, I actually have motion blur off for now. Okay, I'll turn it off. I know you guys hate it. And I have Hairworks off currently as well. I mean, we could try it on, maybe just on Geralt. I don't know, it's not too big of a deal. I was actually seeing it kind of buggy when I had ray tracing on. So I had it turned off for that reason. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and keep it off for now, actually, for that reason. It was kind of bugging out with ray tracing on, it was weird. Anyway, there was, and then we have the Ultra Plus settings, and this is the nice things about this update, is they did update a bunch of this stuff. It can go beyond where the game used to go, at least without modding it. And a lot of what they've done is just kind of do official implementations of a lot of popular mods. So we do get around 60 FPS here in this scene at 4K native resolution with these settings, with the ray tracing off. And the frame time graph isn't perfectly smooth, and especially as I run into new areas, I think as I don't know if it's like transitioning between zones or something, but a lot of times I will get larger frame time stutters. I'm not sure if we're gonna randomly trigger one right as I'm talking to you guys, but it definitely happens, and that happened even on my 4090. This is, yeah, there's a big stutter if you look at the frame time graph, and I felt that one. So this is definitely stuttery. But let's talk about the crazy stutters we had going on with ray tracing on. Although I will say, I think for those of you without ray tracing on, you might want to try the DX11 version of the game, see if that runs better. And also, if you're using FSR2 Quality, you do get a nice performance boost here, and I really do think it's looking quite good. FSR2 does look quite good here. I reset the frame rate counter, and it is getting us nicely above that 60 FPS limit. 80 does feel a lot smoother. And so overall, I think if I wasn't using ray tracing, I'd probably go with this. And quite frankly, maybe try out the DX11 version of the game, that kind of a thing. But we're in the DX12 version because we are going to try out ray tracing. We're going to kick all of that back on. And we're going to go back to the FSR2 performance because I want to get a certain frame rate. This is going to be important for what I'm going to show you guys. Let's talk about that sort of a fix I got for this. Again, look at how unbelievably stuttery that is. It's like it's jumping between frames. It's really weird. 30 FPS should not feel this way. I'm going to reset the average. The averages are over 30. It should not feel like this. 30's a little low, but it shouldn't feel stuttery. So what can we do? Well, if we go to the display settings, and since we're a little above 30, if we just lock it to 30, maximum frames per second 30, watch this. That frame time graph is smooth now. It's magic. Let me reset the frame rate counter. Now you'll notice the 1% lows. If you're looking at the FPS numbers there, the left is the current frame rate. It's just at 30. The middle is the average, and the 1% lows are on the right. So every time now and then we do get these little spikes here, and it does go below 30. But overall, when I pan the camera, it just has normal 30 FPS choppiness, not those weird stutters choppiness. So again, I don't know how much comes through in the YouTube video, but just overall playing it, this doesn't actually feel that bad. And notice that we have all of the ray tracing activated. However, we are using FSR2 performance, and I can definitely tell that as especially as Geralt moves, and you see his swords and things pass over objects in the distance, there's a lot of fizzle to it. And just generally, the image does look a bit soft, especially in motion. So if we didn't want to be this aggressive on the upscaling, which personally I wouldn't be, here's the thing, guys. We can't do ray tracing at 60 FPS, because we could try a 60 FPS limit instead of 30, at least not at 4K, because even with FSR2 performance, if I turn off all of the ray tracing except for the global illumination, which indoors I think really does add a lot, actually. It's kind of nice. We're still, okay, well, I guess I'm at 30 FPS because we have the frame rate limiter on. So let's kick that off. So, not the gamma settings. Geez, I can't. Anyway, here we go. What I'm saying here, see, we're stuttery again. Even the frame rate's higher, this feels way worse. It's so weird. But see, the stutters are back, and we're not near 60. So since we can't lock to 60, I think the locking to 30 target for our 4K ray tracing experience is going to be the target. Like I said, you probably just don't want to play with ray tracing. I'm just having fun playing with the settings, so if you'd like to play along, we're going to keep our 30 FPS limit. And like I said, that actually feels better because it's not so stuttery, right? It smooths it out. But what does that mean we can do for the graphics settings? Well, if we're only using RT global illumination, how about we go to FSR2 Quality? So in other words, if you really want to try out the RT global illumination, FSR2 Quality looks very good. This is a very much like a native 4K experience. The downside here is that we're locked to 30 frames per second, but we have solved the stutters. Reset the frame rate counter here. We've solved the weird ray tracing stutters. We haven't solved the just general stutters you're seeing right there as I kind of load into new scenes and the DX12 version of the game is just broken. We haven't solved that, but we have solved the weird AMD ray tracing stutters. So it's at least a consistent 30 frames per second. Now, one thing I'll mention, by the way, is I know the ever unpopular motion blur. But what motion blur is kind of for, and some of you will still hate it, but I will say what it's really for is smoothing out an image at a low frame rate. At least I think that's what it can be used for. So now panning the camera, and again, I don't know how much this comes across in the YouTube video, you don't see as many of the individual frames pop up. In other words, it feels smoothed out. I might even say it's like a really bad version of DLSS 3 frame generation. It kind of artificially makes it feel smoother than it really is, although just by blurring it rather than putting in reasonable intermediate frames. But personally, I actually would have motion blur on if I was playing at 30 frames per second. But I've heard you guys loud and clear. For the most part, you don't want it. And I think in the YouTube video, it might also just kind of make it look even blurrier than YouTube already makes it look. So maybe on YouTube it's worse worse than it is in person. I don't know, guys. But if this 30 FPS is our target, we can do a lot of other stuff, right? So for example, if we did want to include more of the ray traced settings, if we want to kick on ambient occlusion and shadows, let's see if we can stay at FSR2 Quality. I think we might have to go down to balanced. Yeah, see, do you see the stutters are back? Because the 1% lows are dipping below 30, now the weird, crazy stutters are all over the place again. You just absolutely have to stay above that 30 FPS. It's kind of crazy. I don't know what's going on, and I hope they patch it. But with my weird workaround, let's just go to balanced. And that got us enough performance that, look at that, the frame time graph has smoothed out again, and it feels pretty good. So you can go to, if you're okay with FSR2 balanced, which at 4K looks pretty good, although I will say I feel like I can tell the difference in quality is a little bit better. You can get all of these ray tracing settings except for reflections. Now, the unfortunate thing I've noticed is that I think to get reflections in there, balance setting just isn't quite enough, and we'll get some stutters. It depends on the scene. So I guess see, at first that was fine, but like in this scene, we're stuttering all over the place again. So I think overall, unless where you could go down to DLSS performance, sorry, FSR2 performance, easy to mix them up, and that smooths it out. But for me, I think it's a little too noticeable on the upscale. And the reflections in this game, honestly, their updated screen space reflections, I think, are, for the most part, getting the job done fine. So I'd probably go with the balance setting with ray tracing off, or honestly, personally, probably the quality setting with RT GI and ambient occlusion. Let's see if we can keep that pretty stable. I think we can. And by the way, that's what the consoles do. I'm pretty sure the ray tracing on the consoles is locked to 30 FPS with upscaling. With the RT GI and ambient occlusion. It's the RT GI, in my opinion, that's the biggest impact of the visuals. I'm not going to do the side-by-sides in this video. I just don't have time to edit it. But if you look at my RTX 4090 video in this game, I did do side-by-sides and all of that. And you can see the RT GI, I think, makes a pretty big difference, especially in indoor scenes, actually. Anyway, the frame time graph still isn't great, but let's go ahead and look at, okay, well, what if we were using this GPU at 1440p? What would be going on? First of all, if we take off the frame rate limit, let's just see where we're at here. So if we take off the frame rate limit, once again, the stutters are back. Now we are closer to 60 FPS, but again, we're already using FSR, and at 1440p is the baseline. I think even quality already looks a little bit soft. And going down to performance, I think looks very noticeably soft. And notice we're still not getting to 60, so I still can't lock to 60. Now, I haven't experimented with using frame rate limiters that aren't built into the game. So if you want to use one through your driver software or some other thing and play around with it, maybe you could set like a 50 FPS frame rate limit and see if it helps iron out those frame time spikes. But if we're gonna go ahead and target 30 FPS anyway, why don't we see if we could do it at the native resolution? So native TAA, let's see where our frame rate's at. So our frame rate is over 30 frames per second. With native resolution. So if we're going to be locking to 30 frames per second anyway, which we'll do here, then we might as well stay at the native resolution. So you can use basically the console ray tracing settings and get your 30 FPS lock, which smooths out that frame time graph. And I wonder if we could even add in some ray traced shadows. Can we get reflections? Let's find out. Actually, okay. Looks like right here it's a little more difficult, and we're spiking below. I wonder if we went to FSR2 Quality. I think that would probably get us the difference. So FSR2 Quality with all of the ray tracing turned on. And yeah, the GPU has tons of overhead. You can see that the percentage is only in the 70s. So it looks like we can easily do a 30 FPS FSR2 Quality with all of the ray tracing turned on. Like I said though, probably for most of you, you'd rather just not have the ray tracing turned on and play at a higher frame rate. Totally understandable. Native resolution with the ray tracing off, and I would have to turn off my frame rate limit. So frame rate limit is under display settings. Geez, so many menus, so fast. Okay, so you can see here that, well, you could play at 30 frames per second with ray tracing, or you could play at 100 frames per second. Well, maybe only 88 or 90. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is, I think the vast majority of people are just going to prefer ray tracing off. But if you're just wanting to check out this ray tracing update, like I said, it's similar to what the consoles are doing, locking to that 30 frames per second and seeing what happens. Now, just for fun, why don't we go ahead and take a look at 1080p. So let's go down to 1080p. Looks like at 1080p, we are now now we're just CPU limited. It's looking like this 100 frames per second or so. I can reset the frame rate counter there on the averages, but yeah, it's looking like our GPU is not able to fully utilize. And I think there's some overhead to this DX12 implementation. I think they might be just doing a translation layer from DX11 to 12 or something like that, with some overhead, because I feel like in the old version of the game, I was not this CPU limited at this frame rate. But anyway, it's still a pretty good frame rate. But if we go ahead and kick on all that ray tracing again, this is all the ray tracing at native 1080p, and we're not at 60 FPS. Now, honestly, guys, I don't think FSR looks very good at 1080p, so I think, in my opinion here, we'd probably just frame rate cap to 30 if we were really going to do this. But guys, playing at 30 FPS on a RX 6800 XT at 1080p, well, at least we've got some ray tracing. Gotta trace those rays, guys. All right, well, hopefully this was a kind of interesting, possibly even useful video for you. If you're trying to play around with the ray tracing on an AMD GPU, I'm hoping this gets patched soon, but it's looking to me like frame rate capping. Now, what I haven't experimented with yet is frame rate capping with to other frame rates that the game doesn't support through an external software. So maybe you could dial in your own settings at, 40 FPS or 50 FPS or something like that, and maybe it would work a little better. The game in general still feels a little bit stuttery and unstable at times, but this at least deals with that crazy frame time graph we were getting. Also, for those of you wondering how I'm getting RTSS stats up in the top left corner at all, I pinned a comment on my RTX 4090 Witcher 3 video, which explains how you can make it work. I hope all of you have an excellent day.